Let's talk about a scientific paper from 1991 that had a title so good it sounded like it came from a fairy tale. But the authors, Raphe-Azmitia and Patricia Whitaker-Azmitia, weren't writing fiction. They were describing a massive, powerful system inside all of our brains and a shocking discovery about its hidden potential. And their work really boils down to this one incredible question. What if your brain, the one we all think is pretty much set in stone once you're an adult, actually has a hidden power to heal and regrow, just waiting to be activated? So what is the system they were studying? Well, you've probably heard of it. It's the serotonin-jerkic system. That's just the fancy name for all the brain cells that use serotonin to communicate. But they saw it as something much, much bigger. Because of its incredible scale and its role in building our minds from the ground up, they gave it a new name, the giant of the brain. And believe me, this giant has one heck of a life story. So first up, let's try to get our heads around just how massive this giant really is. And what's so wild about it is that it's this huge paradox, an absolute study in contrasts. Okay, so check this out. It's the first big puzzle. You think a giant would have this giant headquarters, right? Nope. Its command center is shockingly small. The whole thing starts in these tiny clusters of cells deep in the brainstem in a place called the Raphe nuclei. You can see the origin point right here, deep in the core of the brain. And get this, the actual number of neurons that kick this whole system off is only in the thousands. I mean, in a brain with tens of billions of neurons, a few thousand is practically nothing. But from that tiny little starting point, boom, this absolutely massive network just explodes outwards. Its connections, these long fibers called axons, stretch out to basically every single part of the brain and all the way down the spinal cord. And this image just shows you the whole shebang. You can see how it reaches everywhere. So think about that for a second. It starts from just a handful of cells and becomes the single most widespread chemical network in the entire brain. Yeah, giant is definitely the right word for it. So why? Why does the brain need a system that's so enormous? Well, it turns out its most important job happens way before we're even born. You can think of this giant as the master architect of the young, developing brain. This system is one of the very first to show up on the job site, super early in gestation. It acts like a construction foreman, telling cells when to divide and where to move. It literally lays down the tracks to guide other neurons to their final destinations. It helps the all-important cortex mature, and it even wires up our sensory areas before they're even working. In short, it builds the very house it's going to live in later. Okay, but what happens after the construction is finished? What does the master architect do then? Well, this is where the story gets really, really interesting. It seems like the giant's work is done. Once all that complex wiring is in place and the brain hits maturity, this incredibly powerful, constructive job that the serotonin system was doing, it just seems to switch off. The giant goes from being a busy builder to just a quiet resident. The researchers themselves captured this idea perfectly in that 1991 paper. I mean, how poetic is this? They wrote, "The developmental role of the 5-HT system is dormant in the adult brain. The giant sleeps." And that just begs the most important question of all, right? Sleep isn't permanent. So if the giant is only sleeping, is there a way to wake it up? And the answer that they discovered was a huge, resounding yes. They found that under very specific conditions, the adult brain could actually reawaken those old developmental powers. It's a stunning example of what we now call brain plasticity. So how'd they figure this out? Well, they ran a clever experiment. They used a very specific neurotoxin to create a targeted injury, damaging only the serotonin fibers in a single pathway leading to a part of the brain called the hippocampus. And you can see the result right here in this drawing from their paper. Look at panel B. Just 3 days after the injury. Poof! That dense web of serotonin connections in the area is just gone, wiped out. But then the weirdest thing happened. For a few weeks, nothing. The brain didn't seem to react right away. This delay was a huge clue. It suggested that it wasn't the injury itself that triggered the repair, but some kind of slower, secondary signal that started to build up in the silence. And then this. Take a look at panel C. This is the same exact spot, but 42 days later. The healthy, undamaged serotonin fibers nearby, they started sprouting new branches, growing right into that empty territory and completely rewiring the damaged area. The giant had woken up. It was rebuilding. I mean, that's just mind-blowing, right? But how does it work? What's the biological alarm clock that tells this sleeping giant it's time to get back to work? Well, the researchers laid out this beautiful four-step mechanism. First, the damage happens and the serotonin signal just disappears. Second, these specialized support cells called astrocytes, they're all over the brain. They detect that the chemical is missing. This seems to wake them up. Third, in response, these astrocytes start releasing a special growth-promoting protein. And finally, that protein is the go signal. It tells the surviving serotonin fibers to start sprouting and growing again. And here's the coolest part. This isn't some brand new trick the brain learned. It's literally reaching back into its old developmental toolbox. It's firing up the exact same growth factor machinery the giant used to build the brain from scratch all those years ago. And you can bet the scientists knew just how huge this was. They concluded their paper by saying that this ability to recall developmental processes could give us incredibly important new tools for understanding and, more importantly, treating the aged or damaged brain. And that, right there, is the lasting legacy of this work. It totally flipped the script on how we view the adult brain. It's not this static, finished thing at all. It's a dynamic system with this profound, even if it's sleeping, potential to fix itself. Which leaves us with this one huge, tantalizing thought. If we know the brain can do this on its own after an injury, could we one day learn how to gently and precisely wake that giant up on command? Could we harness this incredible built-in power to help the brain heal from injury, from disease, or even from the simple effects of aging? The giant is sleeping, and we are only just beginning to learn how to wake it.